Hi, I'm Dr. James Young with the U.S. Department of Agriculture. I'm a port identifier in Baltimore. In this presentation, I'll talk to you about the family level identification of Microlepidoptera, larvae of agricultural concern. First, a disclaimer. There is no key in the world that includes all of the fauna. So this key has been specifically designed for the specimens that are found most commonly in baggage and in cargo. It has a lot of information piled into it from both reared material, identifier, training, and knowledge. And we know it's an imperfect system. However, it's the best we can do right now based on what we know. For many of the couplets, I'll be going through them rather quickly. They represent easily understood terminology and structures. Feel free to pause at any time during the video to look at these in depth if you need to. So the first one's easy. The proleg on abdominal segment 6 is missing. In this couplet, we talk about the presence or absence of the second or third seta in the L group on the prothorax, which is illustrated below with the pink arrows. Obvious secondary setae or more than 3 setae in the SV group on A6. This is a character that is seen commonly in some carpocinids, or the setae are absent. Secondary setae, if it's restricted to the area above the proleg, it's a member of the Gylicoidea. You should, at this point, stop and switch keys to a Gylicoid key or Gylicoidea key, or the secondary setae covering the body. This is an unusual character that is seen both in Agonoxeinae or Tortricids and some Ocophorids, where the dorsal plate of A9 is fused to include all of the D setae and SD1. Again, here is where pterophorids will come out. They'll come out in several places in this key. In 5, we see A9. This character can be tricky to interpret. Essentially what you should do is draw a line through seta SD2 connected to SD1 and the L setae. If D is anterior of that line, you would use the first part of this couplet. If it is roughly in line with D2 and SD1, as it is here on the right-hand side, then you would go to couplet 10. Crochets, their orientation. And note here we have an unusual couplet where there are actually no crochets on the proleg. There are these little pad-like prolegs with no crochets on them. This is rarely encountered. If the prolegs are long, sub-equal to the length of the thoracic legs, it would be the top couplet here, or if they're noticeably shorter. And this is the more common character. The position of SD2. SD2 is rather hard to find. It is typically just above the spiracle or slightly in front of it. To see this character, it is best to use side lighting and possibly a little bit of backlighting from below the base. If you cannot find it, it is also possible you could take a drop of stain and add it to the alcohol. As the stain goes through it, it will actually bond either to the membrane or to the seta more quickly, depending on which stain you use, and it will wash off within a few minutes. Crochets, again, how they're arranged in a complete circle or in a penellipse. SD2 or SD1 with rings, this is rarely seen. It is a character similar to what is seen in some of the pyralids, where there are rings around setae, but note that this is either D2 or SD1, so this will be a little bit tricky if you are not sure if you have a pyralid or not. But in the earlier couplets, you should be looking at 3 setae here in this L group on thoracic segment 1. Submentum with a pit or other modification, this would be a Gylicoidea. Note that in several of the older keys, this character was used exclusively for blastobastidae. It is now known that there are several families of Gylicoidea, that have some sort of modification on the submentum. SD1 and D1 of A9 on the same panacula or separate, as illustrated below. This is a character that is commonly used to separate Tortricids from Gylicoids. The position of SD1 on A8 if it's anterior of the spiracle or dorsal. This couplet we have found works for most of the specimens of Cosmopterigids that we get through the ports of entry, but it does not always work for domestic specimens, so please use caution. If you draw a triangle starting at the submentum and going back to the interior margin of the coxal base, it should make an even triangle with the bases of the coxae lining up. If You draw the line, and the mesothoracic or prothoracic cocci, which are not shown here, are well inside those lines that you're drawn. You are looking at possibly a cosmopterygid. If they are evenly in a line or directly parallel to one another, you would go to 15. This couplet is rather tricky and does not always work. It works for most ocophorids and most tortricids. But again, because some tortricids have an anal fork, since you're already here looking, check for an anal fork, just to make sure. If there's an anal fork, it cannot be ocophoridae. In this couplet, SD2 is either absent on A9 or A9 has a large dorsal plate. I mentioned this earlier. This is a condition of a rather odd ocophorid. Or SD2 is present on A9, L3 on thoracic segment 1 is often weak and may be on a separate panacula. Dorsum of the meso and metathorax with small sclerotized panacula. These are things that make a living case. It's thought that these plates are actually used to help keep the animal in its case. Crochets in various shapes should be easy to interpret. Dorsum in meso or metathorax with large, obvious sclerotized plates. This would be coleophorids or blastobastids. Or without the large, obvious plates, but the anal prolegs have crochets. Looking at the crochets and what shape and orientation they're in. Presence of the spiracle. Is it on A8 and anterior? We talked about this earlier. Presence or absence of anal forks. Please note that sometimes the anal fork is hard to find because the specimen has just molted. Again, using the trick with the drop of stain in the alcohol can help show this character. L group of A9, mostly vertically aligned, as shown here, nice straight line, or most typically with L1 anterior to the other two CD. So we've come to couplet 24. This is where you would have gone if there was only two CD in the L group of T1. If L1 and L2 were remote, you're looking at a group of ctenids. Crochets, again, in bands or circle or ellipse. Meso and metathorax with the SV group bicetose versus unicetose. Again, this is counting CD. Using that side lighting will help show these rather small hairs. SV group on all prolegs bearing segments with only 3 CD. And SV group of the proleg bearing with more or less than 3. L1 and L2 common panacula. See here. Close together but not on the same panacula as shown over here. A9 with D1 and D2 very short. D1 occasionally absent. A9 with D2 long. We see very few of these specimens, but the few that we do see coming through the ports, these characters seem to work. If you see one that you think is one of these two families that does not match this, please send in the specimen so we can see it and improve this key. Here are some suggested references. Most of you have heard from the other presentations, either the LEP Intercept tool or the Solanaceae tool. Both of them are very well illustrated and have many cedal maps and illustrations that will help you find some of these structures if you are in question. With that, I'll take any questions.